Good morning, everybody. East Coast Pete back with you. This is Midrock Crisis. And, sometimes I do bands that I love to listen to. And sometimes I do bands that I don't particularly care for. Actually, I hardly ever do that, but the reason I don't like this band has nothing to do with their sound or their artfulness. It's a long story. I'll see if I can get into that. Anyway, Talking Heads were formed in 1975. David Byrne on lead vocals and guitar, Chris Franz on drums, Tina Weymouth on bass, and Jerry Harrison on guitar and keyboards. They were pioneers of new wave and would explore punk, art, rock, funk, and world music. David, Chris, and Tina all attended the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence in the early 70s. David Byrne only enrolled for 1 year. He left to go back home, only to return to Providence and College Hill, but not as a student. I've read articles about Byrne at this time. He has stated that he left RISD because he was intimidated by the rich kids who were his classmates, but I don't think this is so. My experience at RISD in 72 to 78 was that no one really cared about whose family was rich and whose wasn't. Students were busy finding their artistic selves in creation of form follows function art products. Byrne's giant suit that he wore during portions of his Talking Heads show was right out of Art Wood's Giant Puppets Parade at RISD. I was there, I saw it. Byrne's, Franz, and Weymouth's band, The Autistics, sounded awful, but were fun to watch. Byrne either couldn't or wouldn't sing on key, and his guitar was more of a noisy prop. Student bands seemed to care only about outrageous image than musicality at that point. On the verge of the punk explosion, David Bowie was their template. Eye makeup and androgyny trumped lyrical content or melody. Butch hair announced that hippies were old hat. And when the Talking Heads relocated to New York City, they added Jerry Harrison, who could actually play, coming from the Modern Lovers, who were the real forerunners of New Wave, as it would soon be so called. And Brian Eno polished Talking Heads into the artsy powerhouse that we came to know. We took to them because they were different. They were odd in a Rocky Horror novelty kind of way. New wave meant new. That was what mattered. The Talking Heads hit their commercial apex in 1983 with Burning Down the House. The film Stop Making Sense was a rockumentary with concert footage. Song Psycho Killer was a hit, but it wasn't about Son of Sam serial killer David Berkowitz, as was implied. So what was it about? Well, Tina Weymouth wasn't a member until Byrne failed to find a complimentary bassist. Teen had been driving the van to gigs. Fran's girlfriend agreed to learn bass by listening to Suzi Quatro records. In punk, lack of chops was considered an asset. They first played at CBGB in 1975, opening for the Ramones. The name Talking Heads was taken from TV Guide, a small magazine that listed programs each week. Yeah, long time ago, right? The Talking Heads was a face on the tube. They signed with Sire Records. In their 76, their first single was Love, Burning on Fire. Psycho Killer followed. Prior to producing Talking Heads, Brian Eno had worked with Roxy Music, David Bowie, John Cale, and Robert Fripp. He was forward-looking, knew punk wouldn't last, and he envisioned the Talking Heads as post-punk. Chris Franz would introduce African rhythm to the mix, and Eno and the Talking Heads recorded Al Green's Take Me to the River at a studio in the Bahamas, and it became a top 30 hit. Adrian Belew and Bernie Worrell were on hand for Life During Wartime, the This Ain't No Party, This Ain't No Disco line. Chris and Tina formed a splinter group, the Tom Tom Club, and tackled hip-hop. Harrison released a solo album, The Red and the Black, and Byrne released his own solo album, My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. Talking Heads, Once in a Lifetime, was the top 20, boosted by an MTV video. The band took a 3-year break, and Eno moved on to producing U2. Speaking in Tongues produced a top 10 hit, Burning Down the House, and the tour was their last. There were 3 more albums though. Single is She Was, and Road to Nowhere were significant somehow. In '86, Byrne's musical comedy film True Stories was released and critically acclaimed. The last was Naked in 1988. Wild Wild Life and an accordion song, Radiohead, were noteworthy. Tom York admired Byrne and named his On a Friday band Radiohead as an homage. Byrne and Talking Heads split in 1991. The bandmates found out through the media there was no discussion. He just left to begin a solo career. Byrne would sue to keep the others from continuing as Talking Heads. There was a Byrne-less album, No Talking, Just Heads. The 3 attempted a tour to support it, calling themselves Heads. Harrison would go on to produce the Violent Femmes, Fine Young Cannibals, Crash Test Dummies, No Doubt, and Kenny Wayne Shepherd. Franz and Weymouth, who had married in '77, have continued with the Tom Tom Club. They have a cult following in Europe. Talking Heads provided an alternative to arena rock, and that's what we needed, was alternatives. I mean, you know, you go to an arena rock show and first thing you think of is, I need an alternative. Quickly, the story about me and not caring for this band since I was kind of close. I was like a year behind the others at RISD. My band had a PA system, a big Ovation PA system with 2 giant sets of speakers, a separate mixing board, powered speakers. It was loud. I got tired of lugging that thing around. It was pretty big. And PAs were getting smaller, so I sold the PA to somebody who told me that they needed a PA system, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, you guys pay me for the same price I paid for it, which was $400. I know that doesn't sound like much, but back then it was fairly substantial, especially if you're a starving artist at a special rich college. So David Byrne, when he was in the Autistics, he bought my PA with a down payment of $100. I never heard from them again. So if they went on and used my PA and got themselves famous, for a lot of years I carried that around with me. I thought maybe I should write to David Byrne and say, hey, where's my $300 plus interest? But I didn't do that. I'm sure he doesn't remember. He doesn't remember me. Why would he? So I've got a problem with David Byrne. It's a kind of a cup of poison that I've poured for him. But then I took a sip myself. It's not worth it having feelings like this that last so long. It's not worth it. Don't do it. Find a way out. That's what I'm trying to do. Hopefully I'll be able to tell you someday, good people, that I accomplished that. But I think it's going to take some therapy. Well, anyway, see you next time on my mid-rock crisis. Sorry to take stuff out of school.